Okay, Angie, I think we can start.
Great, I was just going to ask. Great, thanks for joining us. As you know, you've joined a webinar on accelerators and proof of concept programs at various universities. My name is Angi Kujak. I'm Senior Director of Contracts at UCLA's Technology Development Group, and I'm really interested in this topic. I've been listening to several webinars and had some conversations with mentors who have told me repeatedly that the key will be in accelerators when we get out of this epidemic or this pandemic. So I thought I would get together some people that I really look up to and think are leading this field to share their expertise, to see where this field is going. I'm by my role, and I'll explain what that is I largely out-license technologies. And so the stronger that technology is, the more evidence I have to prove that it will work for its intended purpose, the better negotiation, the smoother negotiation, the better contract I end up with. So accelerators and proof of concept, anything that helps bridge that gap helps me do my job. Next slide. Thanks. So as I said, I'm Angi Kujak, Senior Director of Contracts, and I largely negotiate contracts, patent licenses, also more complex, larger agreements master agreements with companies. And Mary, I work with Mary. She's on one of our panelists team, Mary Sullivan, who's a principal on our new ventures team. Mary, maybe you can just say a couple of words about yourself.
Sure, yes. So yeah, my role includes managing the UCLA Startup in a Box program, and I also run the therapeutics portfolio for the UCLA Innovation Fund. So that includes evaluating promising therapeutic programs that could benefit from our funding, and then working with the teams we fund to de-risk the programs and attract potential licensees.
Great. Next slide. And so before I explain why this webinar and why now, I want to just introduce the four panelists, and I'm going to go across the coast. One of the universities I highly admire, the Tech Transfer Office, Columbia University. I have here on the panel today, Dmytro Pokhylko. If you want to introduce yourself, I'm sure I murdered that. If you'd introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Dmytro Pokhylko. I'm director at Columbia Lab to Market Accelerator Network. We provide technical and strategic support to a network of accelerators in life sciences and physical sciences. I'll go through them in more detail during my presentation. But before joining Columbia, I spent about a decade at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, leading technology and entrepreneurship teams in a lot of the initiatives that came out of the Bloomberg and de Blasio administrations to make New York a more competitive place for early stage technology ventures. Happy to be here.
Great. And next I'll move to Greg Keenan, who I used to work with at WARF. If you want to introduce yourself, Greg, and tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thanks, Angie, for the invitation. So my name is Greg Keenan. I'm a Senior Director at WARF. I'm in our ventures, our venture office. In my role, I run our accelerator, which is the topic of our conversation today, but I also lead equity investments in the spin-outs, startups that spin out of UW-Madison. I've been with WARF for just about 3 years. Prior to joining WARF, I spent the majority of my career commercializing early stage technologies out of corporate research labs, and perhaps most important for this topic, I spent about 10 years in 2 university startups commercializing early stage technologies through startup mechanisms. So, I think my time at WARF is really a combination of doing business development and corporate development across large organizations and startups. And have been really, really thrilled about what we've been able to accomplish using our accelerator in terms of moving technologies off of a university campus into the market.
Great. And I think, as you'll explain later, I think your program actually stemmed out of the 2008 economy slump. And I had a conversation with Carl, and he said, it's going to be all about accelerators, proof of concept funds. You've got to look there and do what you can. So that's part of the reason why this webinar came together. And then Mike Cohen, who I now work with at UC Berkeley. I'm at UCLA, but I've gotten to know him, and he's always doing something creative. He's always pushing the envelope in some way. So I knew I had to have him on this webinar. So if you want to introduce yourself, Mike.
Sure, Mike Cohen at UC Berkeley. I am the Director of Innovation Ecosystem Development in UC Berkeley's Office of Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances. So I work with a lot of the startup accelerators on the campus and the early stage investors, incubators. I also do full stack IP management and licensing across the entire spectrum, from information technology to biotech to clean tech. And prior to UC Berkeley, I did a few startups and also worked in product management for the computer industry at Sun Microsystems, MIPS Computers, and Silicon Graphics.
Great. And then to go to my home team, Tom, Tom Lipkin, if you'd introduce yourself. That would be
Sure.
great.
My name is Tom Lipkin. I'm the director of the UCLA Innovation Fund, and I run the New Ventures group. We're housed in the TDG, the Technology Development Group, the Tech Transfer Office at UCLA. We work to invest in early stage and promising academic projects to the Innovation Fund, which I'll talk to you more about, and then provide startup support to our portfolio of startup companies that have licensed intellectual property. So I have been at UCLA since 2012. I started the group there. Prior to that, I was at OUP, Osage University Partners, which is an early stage venture fund that invests in university-based startup companies. And prior to that, I was at Columbia's Tech Transfer Office.
Great, thanks. Next slide. Great. So yeah, why this webinar and why now? So since I've joined UCLA 2 years ago, what I really find cool at UCLA is that we're really willing to adapt and try new things. And since this topic came up and I kept hearing it over and over again and anticipating what might happen to the economy or is probable to happen to the economy post-COVID, what can we start thinking about now that can impact and improve our ability to out-license technologies tomorrow? So I know post-2008, being involved in transactions prior to 2008, it didn't take us quite as much negotiation. The red lines weren't as red, but post-2008, you definitely saw by 2010, 11, negotiations just become more complicated. I think coming out of COVID, you'll see this again, that it'll just take more. That bar is going to get higher for investment. And it'll require more evidence as to proof of concept going forward. And so also we are hearing from experts that startups aren't going away anytime soon. This isn't a fad. In fact, it's likely that they'll become more important than ever. So those ecosystems that we have all been working on, they'll become crucial. And so what can we do to help facilitate and help grow and make those stronger so that we too succeed? And what I think is cool about universities is that we aren't competitors. The success of one university necessarily can shed light on our success or ability to succeed. And so the hope is out of this webinar is to get some ideas and bits and pieces, even if you don't have a financial fund to pull from to support your technologies. What non-financial efforts can you put in place that can help advance your technologies so that we can get and continue to get our technologies out into the public good? And I think next slide, I think just, when I was saying what was kind of what will the challenges be, on the flip side, the positive is that I think post-COVID, we'll find that there's a stronger interest in understanding of the value that research at universities brings to the public good. Right now, a lot of experts and the country is turning to researchers at universities to help find novel therapeutics. It's clear that diagnostics are going to be more important than ever. I think diagnostics were kind of set to the side, where now it's very highlighted. It's why it's important to have a good diagnostic. So I think there's a lot of positive that can come out of this as well. And so how this will be run, this webinar, is that we're going to step through first through each of the panelists, and they're going to provide an overview of their programs. And so hopefully you can kind of understand from their presentation the different elements, because I thought it was interesting when I looked at when assembling this and trying to put the panelists together, I went to their websites to try to figure out all the different of their program and how different they are. And so, and then at the end, we'll have Q&A where we can kind of ask what has worked well, what they may stop doing in their programs. So to start everything out, if we could start with Dmytro with the next slide, and he'll begin with Columbia's programs.
Sure, thanks, Angie. All right, so let's dive in. Marvi, can you move on to the next slide? So this is the slide that references a lot of our work, and I think the next presenters will refer to this valley of death as well. And we coined our own term that's canyon of validation. But bottom line, there are a lot of things that can go wrong for early stage ventures, especially those that are coming out of universities. They need a lot of guidance, and even if you provide that guidance, things don't necessarily happen. But if you do provide, you increasing our chances. So this is pretty much the modus for us to help provide critical elements to increase the chances of survival. Next slide. So this is an overview of our universe. You'll see in the middle, there's Columbia Lab to Market Accelerator Network. And then around us, there's a network of accelerator programs. There are 4 in life sciences, starting with biomedics, which actually was the first program almost 9 years ago that started to run and then became sort of a model that we replicated across additional verticals. There is traditional therapeutics, and also 2 additional programs focusing on oncology and cancer research. On the physical sciences, you have programs that are focusing on clean energy, PowerBridge New York, that are focusing on blockchain accelerator that we have with IBM, emerging media and tech, AR, VR, which is part of the New York City Media Lab, Combine, and R Lab programs. And last but not the least, you have Cyber NYC program that is part of a large city initiative in New York City. At the bottom, you see some of the collective stats that and success metrics that all of the programs throughout all of their iterations have accomplished. Solid number of applications, but ultimately it's the last couple of metrics that just shows that you have teams launching, forming entities, and then having exits or getting additional funding. That's pretty much what our work mostly focuses on. The next slide offers us to go under the hood a little bit and just see how some of these programs are structured. And I guess in a somewhat typical and sometimes annoying fashion, a lot of times the answer is going to be, it depends. And I feel we've fully embraced this reality and just try to roll with the punches and try to figure out structures that work for different stakeholders. And I think that was one of our differentiating abilities to engage such a breadth of partners and structures. So usually our programs are comprised of 2 elements. One is a 10 to 12 week bootcamp, which usually is a combination of Steve Blank's Lean Launchpad methodology with deep dives and workshops specific to each of those verticals. And then a subset of the cohort teams is then invited to a so-called incubator phase where there's a bit of more hands-on guidance and support. As I mentioned, there are programs that are newborns. We just are wrapping up our cybersecurity program, had our demo day yesterday. Sorry, it's been a long week. And then some of our other programs are almost a decade old. Applicant eligibility varies by who's the funder. If there are partners that are specifically interested in Columbia faculty, then that determines the eligibility. If a partner is a municipality, the city of New York, then that applicant pool obviously expands to academic institutions from the city of New York, and we have media labs, cybersecurity, blockchain, are pretty much focusing on academic partners within the city of New York. And then if it's a state, then obviously the pool would increase, and we're able to accommodate for that. The sweet spot for the cohort size is about 10 teams. We find that if it's significantly lower, you don't get the feel of the cohort and peer learning. And if it's significantly higher, then it starts to feel like a lecture and you don't really have that one-on-one engagement. So we tend to have our cohorts of that. IP requirements, again, varies. Mostly for the life science programs, there's an IP component, which makes sense. For some of programs like blockchain, it's hard to have that requirement, even though it's encouraged. And then in terms of the funding, again, varies by the program, but for the most part, it's a combination of a stipend during the bootcamp phase to just offset some of the basic expenses that are related to being in the program, going to a conference, getting some developers time or advisory, so we're doing that. And then a subset of the cohort would then get additional validation funding after the bootcamp phase is over. Another benefit of our program is that the funding is non-dilutive. So that is something that I will touch upon later, to the extent that it de-risks and validates the science while not really taking a hit on equity. So after our accelerators, these teams become more attractive because they haven't had the hit on the equity. And I already mentioned on the source of funding, again, we're able to take it from the philanthropic sources to corporate, to city and state. Next slide, please. This is just going deeper into the elements of each of the programs. Like, again, it varies, but ultimately it gravitates towards these four buckets. One is education, Steve Blank's lean launch methodology, and then vertical specific deep dives from compliance to FDA regulation and life cycles, things of that sort. Mentorship and guidance is probably one of the things that is the hardest to scale and automate. We find that education these days is relatively easy to get in 2020. Teams can get the lectures and there's a lot of content, but mentorship, one-on-one engagement, and being able to follow up and engage in an effective manner is hard. So we spend a lot of efforts and attention to shaping it in a way that is beneficial both to the teams and to the mentors as well, so that they come back for future cycles. Like, an important component is cohort and community learning, which, as I mentioned, they learn from each other. There's a sense of camaraderie, there's a sense of commiseration, there's a lot of efforts that they need to be doing during the program. So obviously, it's important for them to know that they're not alone, because being a founder can be a very lonely job. So, like, we definitely encourage that. And funding never hurts. That's one of the elements that is attractive to our programs. Next slide. An overview, we tend to follow roughly the academic calendar. We spend most of the fall semester recruiting through info sessions at different schools and faculties and departments, all kinds of mail serves and one-on-one and coffees and conversations, really trying to cast a wide net, but also be targeting so that, on the input we get a high number of high quality applications. We make decisions around December, and then the bootcamp phase runs pretty much for most of the spring semester. And around this time, I'm actually living through the demo day galore. It's, demo days. This year we had to transition to virtual, and Zoom webinars have pretty much been our existence for the last couple of weeks, if not months. And then after the demo day, it's the incubator phase, but ultimately just helping those teams to either apply to later stage accelerators, Techstars, Y Combinators, doing their own validation work, and continuing through our mentor network. Next slide. This is more of an overview of what L2M specifically provides to the programs. Usually there is a person who is the public face of the programs that we work. There's a managing director that has the main expertise. So the role of L2M oftentimes comes down to like taking care of business. Like we're helping with getting curriculum on board. We're helping with the outreach, is making sure that applications happen, that there's the software to review application, things of that sort, so that the directors and managers of programs can focus on what they need to focus on and don't worry about the nuts and bolts of standing up and running the program. This also goes during the bootcamp phase. It can range from making sure that caterers show up on time to helping giving feedback during the weekly readouts on some of the presentations and decks. Demo day, same thing, making sure that RCP number is there, that the web presence is there, venues, when there were venues are taken care of, things of that sort. And then beyond, having this vantage point of being able to look across multiple programs gives us a unique perspective and ability to guide programs on making improvements and adjustments during the off cycles. In addition to that, we're able to bring service providers on board and discounts and bulk value add elements that would be difficult for individual programs to obtain on their own. But because we come up with this L2M umbrella, we're able to bring partners who are that much more interested in working with this larger community of early stage ventures. Next slide.
Marty, can you move to, oh, thanks.
I think that one probably of most important ones is, while we're super proud of the work that we do at L2M, we never forget that the last thing that we want to do is to do this in a bubble, that we're just so great because we do all of these things. The question that we keep asking ourselves is, to what end? Right? Like, it needs to be the value to all of the different stakeholders that are part of our existence. And, starting with the teams, for all the reasons that I just explained, obviously this is helpful to them, but also beyond that, it helps the faculties and other teams to try this out without having to take the plunge, right? Like, we learn how valuable it is for them to actually explore that this is actually a feasible path for them. So there's a value in there. Being part of Columbia Tech Ventures, we work closely with licensing officers, where you have stronger IP to license out and de-risk science, and just something that licensing officers then have a stronger position dealing with the licensees. Moving more broadly, these efforts contribute to the perception of the university as entrepreneurship friendly and makes it that much more attractive to faculty and to students. To the corporate ventures, as I mentioned, it's just more valuable science. They like to not necessarily license super early, but they like the inventor team to take that science additional steps forward to help validate it and de-risk it, and then engage with them. And then in addition to that, just beyond the licensing itself, just an ability to engage with PIs and faculty in not a stodgy and formal manner, but as a mentor, as an advisor, as a guest speaker or fireside chat presenter. So L2M allows that format for them. And ultimately, if the partner is a municipality or state or federal government, obviously we're checking off a lot of boxes on workforce development, economic growth, and things of that sort. So this is roughly the environment in which we operate. Just provided the overview of sort of nuts and bolts and more of a macro picture of our existence.
Thanks. Yeah. So I wanted to just tell the audience too, I got to spend some time with his slides, and they're really they're worth looking at in detail. I was impressed by how diversified of angles that you approach getting the technology to market. I mean, it's just, such a small amount of it is actually about funding, and so much of it is about person hours and investment of time and sweat into investing into the ecosystem more broadly. So next is Greg Keenan from WARF. And Greg, you're muted. Sorry.
Great. Sorry about that. Through this short discussion of the WARF Accelerator, you're going to hear a lot of the common, a lot of common threads that Dmytro just talked about. But first of all, before getting into the our WARF Accelerator, I wanted to just highlight some of the innovation resources that are available to our innovation community. As many of you know, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, or WARF, is the designated technology transfer and intellectual property office for UW-Madison. We are a separate nonprofit that exists to serve the university. So in addition to that core IP and licensing function, we do provide a broad range of innovation resources, from education on one hand, where we support a number of programs that help our innovators understand how to assess an opportunity and how to even take it to market. We also provide free law services through our law and entrepreneurship clinic, and also offer a number of free business services. On the far other side, we also are very active in making investments in those technologies that spin off our campus, either through our venture office, where we make direct equity investments in spin-out companies, as well as through our LP relationships we have with venture funds that come out of investments we make through our endowment that we manage. But what I want to focus on today is that in-between space, that accelerate space, where we provide a range of support opportunities that really try to advance the university research into a commercial business opportunity. So we have a variety of what I'll call gap funding programs. The flagship program for us is the WARF Accelerator, which I run. I do want to make one, there's one misnomer here. We call ourselves an accelerator. As Angie mentioned, this program was started back in 2010 after the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis. And the term accelerator, I think, has taken on a very specific meaning, particularly as it relates to venture capital. So our accelerator does not take equity. We do not provide space and wraparound business services like a venture accelerator. We're really focused on accelerating technologies off our campus into the market. So that's why we're called the accelerator. I will mention that our program, as I stated, was started in 2010, was really based off of the great program that MIT runs in the Despondé Center. So let's talk about a little more details of the WARF Accelerator. So we would characterize our program as a proof of concept gap funding program. And Dmytro did a great job highlighting all the activities that occur in this gap. And what I thought Dmytro's slides did a wonderful job highlighting is it's not just a gap in funding. So, when you have this, gap that forms between the end of a university research effort to, business success, many times we think of that as just a financial gap. And I think what Dmytro's slides really highlighted are there's the sheer number of gaps that we have to fill, from financial to human resources to market expertise. And so what we've tried to do with the WARF Accelerator is try to fill some of those gaps. We certainly on our own can't, completely close the gap, but our goal is really to get it de-risked enough that we can get a company interested in licensing the technology, or get investors and entrepreneurs interested in starting a company around the technology. So the minimum requirements I want to highlight on this slide as well. For us, we are a pre-licensed program. So the minimum requirement is an accepted disclosure. So we do use this program as a way to incentivize disclosures into a transfer office. As part of the application process, we do require a commercialization investigators will work on with our licensing team. That plan can be, as many of you know, these are some early stage technologies. We're not expecting full blown out business plans. Many times it's really just a business hypothesis that we're able to test through our investment. In addition, we do ask, and we do not fund basic research, we are funding what we'll call technical de-risking milestones that are particularly relevant for whatever market we're targeting. And so, I'll just summarize that really the WARF Accelerator is providing both that business-related support, which I think in many cases is more important than the funding, to help us do demonstrations and prototypes that really allow us to generate interest in the technology. So next slide.
And Marty, could you?
Next slide. Yeah. Uh-oh.
You guys
Looks
see
like
it?
we're
I think there's a lag. It's on
Yeah,
the
there
next
you go.
slide. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So this slide will basically summarize our program in totality. So again, what we're trying to do with our accelerator program is validate market potential, demonstrate commercial value, and ultimately de-risk technology to attract industry partners. Our program is not dedicated to generating startups. We're really trying to commercialize the technology and whatever makes the most sense for that particular project. So we're just as happy to license a technology to an existing company as we are to license it to a startup company. So we are agnostic to the ultimate commercial outcome. So on the left-hand side of your slide, you see a depiction of the way we bucket our technology investments. So we call these market focus areas, and there's 5 of them. We look at putting investments into computer science and engineering, healthcare, clean tech, research tools and diagnostics, and then food and ag. So the reason we bucket each one of those is we do have a licensing manager that runs each one of those market focus areas, and each of those market focus areas has a dedicated team of industry experts we call catalysts that help us review proposals. They help us make sure we're funding the right milestones. They make connections for our project teams, and in some cases they even help and roll up their sleeves and help advance our projects. So what I would like to do on the right-hand side of the slide, where you have that improved commercialization through strategic selection, these bullets I'm going to talk through, but I'm going to highlight some of the things that we do differently and that we think work really well for us. So in terms of the selection of the IP assets that we make investments in, we do not do a call for proposals. Our program is an invite only program. We do this on a rolling basis. So our licensing IP team and a number of other resources on our campus help us identify those technologies they feel with an investment in a prototype or a demonstration, they could more effectively market the technology. So we do not do that open call for proposals. And we find that works very well for us because we're able to put the money into the project when the project needs it. So we're not tied to a single dates for proposals. In terms of the technical de-risking milestones, again, we really spend a lot of time making sure these milestones are relevant for the market that we want to enter. And that's one of the main areas that we use our industry experts and our catalysts is really to help us, inform, are we funding the right milestones that will resonate with the customers that would potentially license the technology. We talked about, delivering this critical business industry expertise. We have our core group of catalysts that provide that base load of support. More and more, we're starting to use more dedicated subject matter experts when it makes sense. So we're continuing to increase our network of folks that we use to consult on our projects. I will say, in terms of the catalysts, we do offer a stipend to our catalysts. It really is optional. Some take it, some don't. But we found it to be very beneficial to actually pay our experts for their services. And we can certainly talk about that more in question and answer if people want to understand our logic around that a bit more. In terms of the collaboration with UW faculty and students, probably one of the biggest determinants of success in our program isn't necessarily the technology. It's really the interest and willingness of the principal investigator and their labs to work with us on commercialization. So that is one of the big criteria for us when we make an investment in a technology, is that that PI and their lab are really open to working with us to commercialize the technology. And then finally, one of the areas that we've really been investing more in since I've joined is this targeted marketing. So we do put a lot of effort in funding the program is just the first step. Once we have that milestone or prototype developed, I think the hard work just begins. And so our office spends a lot of time building marketing content around the technology so that we can more effectively generate interest from industry, investors, and entrepreneurs. And so each one of our projects actually has a startup-like pitch deck developed that we use to generate interest. One of the things I want to just highlight before we leave this slide is that, without a doubt, our program benefits the principal investigators and their labs on our campus. But the real customer for me and from my perspective is our licensing team, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to fund a milestone that allows them to more effectively market. So one of the things I'm really passionate about is making sure that our licensing team is included in our customer set, that it isn't just about supporting the campus, it's really also about supporting our licensing team's ability to move a technology off the campus into the market. Next slide. So on this next slide, when it pops up, you'll see some of the resources that we use in our program. We talked about our catalyst. We have 59 of those right now. We supplement those with additional subject matter experts. Our catalysts, actually less than half of them are alumni. So we've been also very successful at attracting folks to help us from venture capital, other industry executives, and entrepreneurs. To date, we have funded projects in 91 researchers' labs. And we've had 19 participants that actually have participated multiple times. But what I love about what we've been able to do with our accelerator program is we have a lot of first-time participants in the program, and it's just wonderful to be able to engage our faculty in commercialization efforts. For many of them, it's their first time, thinking about their project and pitching their projects in a way that is, more commercial in nature. So that's one of the things I love about my job. And then finally, in terms of project funding, we have funded since 2010 over 115 projects, and with an investment total of probably about $14 million. So, we'll invest anywhere from $5,000 to several $100,000 per project. And I think that's an important differentiation. We don't set criteria on the level of funding. We really are trying to fund whatever milestone is needed to get to that next value inflection point. Next slide. And this are the outcomes. So to date, again, our program is really driven and measured by our success in licensing technology. And to date, we have 43 revenue generating agreements out of our program, 15 startups. And this is something that we didn't initially really measure or even communicate to our board. But when we started to look at the additional investment that our technologies were receiving in the form of grants and equity, we've been able to generate, or our projects have been able to generate $6.50 of additional investment for every $1 that we've put into the program. So I think this is a huge lever for us and something that we're actually going to continue, really measuring and communicating. And then finally, I wanted to highlight one example of a project that was quite successful for us. And on the screen here, you see Jim Steele. He spent 30 years at UW as a professor in food science. One of the areas that he's a world expert in is in lactic acid bacteria. He was working on a project as part of our cellulosic research efforts on UW's campus, and he engineered a lactic acid bacteria that would produce ethanol instead of lactic acid. And he thought, wow, this bacteria might be really interesting for first-generation ethanol plants because lactic acid is a contaminant in the fermentation process and is one of the reasons that they are forced to use antibiotics. But by re-engineering the lactic acid bacteria to produce ethanol, he had a hypothesis that, wow, this industry might really want to use this technology as a way to increase ethanol production and minimize the use of antibiotics. So he put a proposal together with his licensing manager, and we funded that proposal. And he got, in addition to the funding, which supported a prototype, he got connections and insights on the right milestones and how to pitch that project output to industry. And lo and behold, he generated quite a bit of interest from industry. So in less than 2 years after starting our project, he took the technology from a research lab. And remember, this is someone that's been in academia for 30 years, took it from a research lab, started his own company after completing the accelerator program. And then that company ultimately got sold to Lallemand. So that happened within 2 years. And so that's a great example of what happens when it all works. And, you know, I think he got great advice from our catalysts. He got additional support from a number of other support groups around our campus. And, you know, I think this is just a great example of what can happen with a program like ours.
Great, thanks, Greg. And now I'll move it to Berkeley and Mike Cohen.
Angie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right, for the next 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to just give us a quick overview of UC Berkeley's ecosystem for tech transfer, acceleration, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Then I'll highlight a few things that are working for us, a few things that are not. I'll describe what we're doing to address some of those issues, and then I'll end with an example of a program that's kind of pushing the envelope, especially in the context of the pandemic situation. And I'll try to bring us back on schedule to leave time for Thomas and Q&A here. So first, what you see on your screen is over the last several months, a group of people at UC Berkeley have been combing the campus to get an overall inventory of all the innovation, entrepreneurship, tech transfer, and acceleration programs going on across the campus. And then we produced this graphic here. And as you can see along the y-axis, all these programs are divided into 8 categories, as well as the academic programs along the top. And there are well over 50 logos on this screen. So this is a good snapshot of the ecosystem right now. Next slide. And so what's working is, first of all, this is a vast, dynamic, and relatively decentralized innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And it's working for us, as you can see on the right here. PitchBook recently ranked UC Berkeley #2 in venture-backed startups, and we're pushing for #1. And one of the reasons why this works at Berkeley is because we have a wide range of technologies, markets, people, and all kinds of stages of technology, startups, and entrepreneurship. And I could contrast, for example, with across the Bay, UC San Francisco is a great university with a top-tier innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem, but they don't have undergrads, and they mostly focus on life sciences. Whereas at Berkeley, it's the whole range, and so there's a lot of resources that go into different types of technologies, markets, people, and stages. And then finally, one of the other things that this particular ecosystem leverages is at Berkeley, we have a kind of a vortex campus, and that can be contrasted with university waypoint campuses. Waypoint campuses are often great research universities. They attract a lot of great students and grad students and postdocs and professors. Those people contribute to the campus ecosystem when they're here, and then when they graduate, many of them disperse. However, there are a few vortex campuses where they have the same thing as the waypoints, where every year great students and faculty come to the campus, they contribute. But at vortex campuses, many of those students, when they graduate, they stay to live and work in the vicinity of the campus. And year after year of that pattern builds up this super critical mass of I&E human capital. And that's what this vast, dynamic, and relatively decentralized ecosystem at Berkeley leverages. Next slide. But what's not working? Well, first of all, let me say that having been doing this for several years now, there's always opportunities for improvement, especially because the world around us is improving. One of the things I like to point out is I can remember when entrepreneurs, when they were starting companies, the first thing they did was write a business plan. Now they don't do that anymore. They try to get an MVP and then go out and do product customer fit. So everything's changing, and so our ecosystem has changed along with that. But one of the the trade-offs with our what's going on at Berkeley is navigating the system can be relatively confusing, especially for new students and people from the outside. So that was one issue. Where do I start? How do I leverage? Where do I begin? And the other issue that we were grappling with is coherence. There were some overlaps in certain places, and we saw opportunities for synergy. And also, we felt that if we did more of a unified PR, maybe we'd get more of impact out on a global scale. So next slide. So what we did to address some of those issues is, first of all, a couple of years ago, we created a single portal for all the innovation, entrepreneurship, acceleration on campus. It's called begin.berkeley.edu. Begin is kind of an acronym for Berkeley Gateway to Innovation. And there's a concierge service on that website, and we get a lot of traffic to that service to help people figure out how to navigate the system. And then the other area related to coherence is this year, starting at the beginning of the year, we had for the first time a Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer come onto the campus, a new position. That happens to be, by the way, our most recent Dean of the UC Berkeley Business School. And so with that kind of position, Rich Lyons, who has a job, is helping to create more coherence throughout the vast, dynamic, and relatively decentralized ecosystem. Next slide. So one example that I'll leave you with of how we're trying to push the envelope of innovation, entrepreneurship, and acceleration is what we call this program called a Shared Special Facility for Innovation Entrepreneurship. The acronym is the SUFI program. And what it allows is startups affiliated with UC Berkeley to do commercial R&D in a professor's labs, but under very rigorous conditions and oversight, because that's a very anomalous situation to have a for-profit startup doing commercial R&D in a professor's lab. And you can see on the screen there's 9 issues that we had to address before we got this approved. And even then, when we got it approved, it was just a two-year pilot to see how it could work. And if you go to this website at the bottom of this page screen here, you'll see that there's it describes this program and it includes the bottom a review of the program after 2 years. And if you go through that review, you'll see that a lot of the startups said they could not have got going if not for this specialized this program. And one place where it really shines is in these surgical opportunities where the research team has developed a specialized rig in the faculty's lab to do some kind of research that then that startup needs to continue to use in order to pursue the commercialization. And so if for them to leave the lab and have them to reproduce that rig would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what this program allows them to do is stay in that professor's lab, again, and under very rigorous conditions and oversight, and continue to use the specialized commitment to accelerate the technology and the startup. And that's one example of how we're pushing the envelope here. And I'll pause right there and let Tom take it.
Great. And just before Tom starts here, I just want to say that being part of the UC system, what's really cool is that we have 10 campuses. And so we are heavily collaborative with one another and getting on these calls. And I heard about the SUFI program. I'm like, what is that? It just sounds like there's so many no's. And Mike and Carol, the director at Berkeley, were able to kind of remove and find a way to navigate and be nuanced on their approach to find a yes and a success on that program. So I'm really excited to see where that's going to be headed. And whether it'll be renewed for a full program. But go ahead, Tom.
But let me just first say, it was a huge campus effort. There's a lot of expertise that went into figuring out all the solutions to those 9 issues, but thank you.
Excellent, and I'm going to move pretty quick throughout my slides so we can get to the discussion and Q&A. But just a little bit of background on UCLA and kind of what makes us a bit unique is that we are an interdisciplinary campus. So we have engineering, physical sciences, life sciences, as well as our hospital right on campus, and we are geographically constrained. So it is a very tight-knit campus, and the academic projects are far more collaborative for that reason. So a lot of our molecular and cell biologists get feedback from clinical faculty members, engineers get access to the clinical expertise as well. And I think some of our projects are a little bit more advanced for that reason. UCLA in particular has a history of success with academic drug discovery. We have successes in Erlita, Xtandi, and Kybella. Move on to the next slide. And our innovation fund is very, very similar to what Greg discussed with WARF Accelerator. So we are advancing promising academic projects internally, pre-company formation, putting small dollars in to get them out to market. And we are playing to our strengths, as I said before. So we have therapeutics and medtech are our two verticals that we focus on. And for us, success comes in 3 different flavors. So we either want to license this technology out into a startup company, we want to license it to industry, or we want to kill the project for a whole host of different reasons. So again, that fail fast model. But for us, it's binary. The technology is sitting on the shelf now. With some funding, we could advance it off campus. For our fund, we put in up to $200,000 per project. And we also have a separate $20,000 budget per project that we can use to pay for advisors and consultants to help advise us on what are the key milestones and deliverables that should be met per project. So very similar to WARF's catalysts. Our team is very, very small. We have 4 people on our team, including me, and they function more as project managers. So Mary in particular focuses on the therapeutics track. We have another person that focuses on medtech, and they are become an integral part of these faculty teams that are all working to advance the projects. I should also state that the funding that we put for the projects, it's not a grant into the lab, it is actively managed, and Mary and Matthew control those discrete budgets. For our projects, we run an open call for proposal, which is a bit different, and we run that every year. We then have an advisory panel comprised half of VCs and half of industry that advise us on which projects are most attractive from various standpoints, and then we ultimately will make the decision on which projects to fund. But their input is very helpful, not just in the decision-making process, but also we have the relationships with them throughout the year, so we can come back in touch with them and find out, if we're able to advance it, their thoughts as the projects evolve. Our 2 tracks are open to all therapeutic modalities, as well as in medtech, that's open to medical devices, diagnostics, research tools, and digital health. Next slide. So the Innovation Fund itself is an evergreen fund. I don't have time to discuss that, but please get in touch with me if you want to understand more of that repayment model. It was established in 2016, and we do have support from the deans in the STEM field. So they are very, very helpful in terms of promoting our open calls for proposals and very collaborative to work with. In terms of numbers, we've had over 350 applications, and ultimately those have resulted in 4 startup companies. I wanted to quickly highlight one of our success stories. So this is on a hair growth technology. It's a small molecule. So we had 3 faculty members that identified a novel mechanism of action, and then they had approached our small molecule screening facility to do screen on known compounds. Then the faculty members engaged our medicinal chemist, one of our medicinal chemists on campus, to develop some small molecules. And then we came in to fund more of that analoguing, as well as some additional work in the lab, some tox, some in vivo PD, and then we were able to outsource some of the development in terms of in vivo PK and MTD work. Ultimately, those faculty members formed a company called Pelage Therapeutics, and because of kind of their relationship with the program, we fielded a lot of external inquiries into this technology. So they were in deep discussions with 4 VCs, 2 corporates, and ultimately Pelage engaged with Allergan, and Allergan has the rights to acquire the company now. Thank you.
Great. So we do have one question from the audience, and this was directed to Dmytro, but I think that other panelists may be able to comment on this as well. But the question was, what is the most common pivot you've seen for ventures in the life sciences? And I guess I'll add to that, if you can't point to one common theme, do you have examples of cases where your programs have helped a life science venture pivot strategies in a way that made them more successful or more attractive to
everyone? I can jump briefly into this. Pivots are like a big part of this, and like one of the success, I would say, outcomes. It's better to realize this early on and then make the pivot and then test it further than sink in a lot of efforts and then, would realize that you still have to do it or you just need to fold down the company. On the life science funds, like I think oftentimes the pivot to different indications based on the market. A lot of times the researcher comes out and, this makes a lot of sense from the research perspective. And then you hit the market and you just realize that it's either not big enough or it's not there timing wise and you need to go to market strategy needs to be different. Or you're, pivoting on modality, whether that's a small molecule versus antibody. So those are just some of the examples on our end. And I'm not going to even touch on the physical sciences.
Great, thank you. We also have a question directed to Greg about the WARF Accelerator. So at which point in your cycle do you engage industry experts, and can you share a little bit about the compensation model?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, historically, early on in the program, we would engage our experts at the point of proposal. So they would get a proposal pitched to them, and then they would provide feedback. And what we're doing more and more is getting our catalysts and experts involved where they see the proposal. And I think that's a direction that our program will be going more and more, is to have all of our projects get input before finalizing a proposal. And then in terms of the compensation model, we do offer $120 an hour for our experts. That's non-negotiable. It's what we are able to provide. It's certainly well below many of our experts' normal rate, but we do, it's as a nonprofit, it's something that we still think is fair, acknowledges our expertise. And one of the reasons we do it, when you pay an expert like that, versus just straight up volunteering, they do make our projects a priority. Which is really what we're after.
Got it. Thank you. So the next question we have is for Columbia's L2M program, how much funding do you provide at each stage?
I'm going to reach into my pocket and give the typical answer. It depends. But jokes aside, I think $10,000 goes a much longer way for a cybersecurity or a blockchain startup than it does for a biomedical. And then so the range is pretty much from $5,000 to $20,000 to up to $200,000, depending on the program and depending on the program's focus. And we keep reminding ourselves that it's not that we have this pot of money and then we have to give this away. I think to Greg's point before, we don't want to just like give out a set amount of money, but like really focus on that specific milestone that we would need to hit with that funding.
Got it, great.
Only running out of time. Could we go to the question that says anonymous attendee? There seems to be a difference between Columbia, which seems to be more people-centric, and WARF UCLA, which seems to be more technology-centric. If that assessment is correct, what are the pros and cons of each proposal? And maybe we could start with Tom on that one.
Yes, we are very focused on therapeutics and medtech, and that's just to speak to the strengths. And because we have a small team and relatively limited resources, medtech is nice in that it does engage engineering faculty members, physical sciences and life sciences, but we do have to play to our strengths. In the past, we have tried to open up our innovation fund to computer science and as well as physical sciences and engineering and clean tech, the clean tech verticals. That's just been more challenging for us because those technologies, the IP is very, can be very, very broad, and to find industry experts to engage has been challenging for us around a given vertical. So we've struggled there and have been far more successful in medtech and therapeutics.
And then maybe I'll switch to Mike because I know his ecosystem as well is very people focused. It's from an outsider perspective, it appears that you pump a lot of energy into helping the ecosystem kind of churn, but are more hands off and hope that it naturally kind of finds its way to indirectly and help you get technologies out rather than necessarily taking it piecemeal by technology.
Right. I think a little bit more organic, again, and taking advantage of all the human capital in and around the campus. But there are places where we in general, we research around, where that went. So it's hard to really see where the industry is going. But we do have programs like the Baker Fellows Program that does look at faculty and postdocs and then tries to perhaps fund some opportunities that look especially promising.
And I'll go to Dmytro next, and I'll just set it up for Greg being last here. But I recall being at WARF, and you mentioned this in your presentation too, Greg, that because you're a 501c3 supporting organization to the University of Wisconsin, it's a much more narrowed perspective. You don't think about it's not your mission to necessarily start startups. And if you listen to Dmytro's presentation, it does seem to have like this bigger cyclone of activity. Is that really sort of the mission of L2M?
Yeah, and it sort of continues the theme of people. I think the focus is to make it easier to the people get technology given where we all sit with then and is not coachable and no timings and different shortcomings of the potential on that. Starting companies that, so at the end of the program is that it's not, oh great, I'm on record. Yes, so it's obviously a good outcome to have, but it's totally acceptable if that doesn't happen. And I would much rather prefer that than just chugging along in something that's obviously going to fail.
We still have a good number of people on. Let's just, I don't know if they can hear us. I presume they can. Maybe we're just being recorded. But Greg, do you want to like finish up that answer?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I certainly think at the core of all of this, this is still licensing and building and commercializing technologies is still a people. So it's an activity by and for people. Our accelerator certainly focuses on technical de-risking. So that's why I think you hear in our description a very technology-centric approach. But make no mistake about it, it really is also about investing in people, whether that's connecting experts to our licensing team and our PIs and students, to developing the marketing content and figuring out how to pitch to businesses so that they are interested in our technologies. One of the things I highlighted and I'll re-emphasize is one of the major success factors in those programs that are successfully commercialized is really about the people that we're investing in to do that technical de-risking milestone, which is our PIs and students. So that is a very important factor in our decision process, whether we're going to fund a project or not. Is this a team that we can work with? And as far as startups go, one of the areas that we're evolving, we are providing for those projects that are clearly going to go the startup route. We are providing more wraparound concierge services to those teams, making sure they understand the importance of a team, how to identify weaknesses in your team and fill some of those gaps before they go out and form a company, before they get that cap table formed, and before they go raise that money. So more and more we are wrapping some of those more people-oriented items around our startup companies, and that's an area that we'll continue to, I think, grow and focus some of our efforts on.
Great. And I'm so glad to hear about Jim Steele. I was still when he was just winding down his lab.
Yeah, you know,
that was a success.
It's a great story because he had a full career in academia and I think was about to retire, and now he's, you know, sold a company and works for Lallemand. So
amazing. Well, thanks to all the panelists. I thought it was a great conversation. We'll make this material available on UCLA's website, including this slide deck, and the other universities are welcome to as well. We'll talk offline, but feel free to follow up with any of us with any questions. And thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.